In 1458, 22 Christian nuns vanished into the Ottoman Empire, not killed but something worse. Erased, their names replaced with numbers, their voices stolen. For 24 years they existed as ghosts beneath Topkapi Palace, forbidden to pray, forbidden to speak their own language, forbidden even to remember who they were. But in the darkness they carved something into stone that the most powerful empire on earth could never destroy. This is the story of women who weaponized silence itself. The bell rope burned Mother Eleni's palms. She'd rung it 41 years every sunset, same rhythm, same bronze note echoing across Thessaly. Tonight her hands shook, not from age, from certainty. "Mother, they're 3 miles out." Sister Damaris burst through the chapel door, ash in her hair. "The villagers are gone. We're alone." Eleni pulled the rope one final time. The bell's voice died in the valley. "We were always alone, child." "Then what do we do?" Eleni turned from the doorway. 21 nuns filled the chapel, faces she'd known for decades, girls she'd trained, women who'd chosen this life when they still had other choices. Sister Magdalena, 17, clutched the monastery's silver crucifix like a drowning woman gripping driftwood. Sister Irina, 70, knelt by the altar, lips moving in prayer, her voice couldn't finish. Sister Thalia's fingers were ink-stained from copying manuscripts she'd never complete. "We witness," Eleni said. Damaris grabbed her arm. "Witness what? Our own rape, our own choice." The word landed like a stone in still water. "The Ottomans will demand we convert," Eleni continued, her voice carrying to every corner. "They'll promise mercy for apostasy. They'll threaten torture for refusal." She paused, met each woman's eyes. "I will not tell you what to choose. Your soul is yours alone. But understand this: faith proven in comfort proves nothing. Faith proven when everything is stripped away except the choice itself." She didn't finish. The gates exploded inward, not opened, annihilated. 12-foot oak doors 6 inches thick splintered under the battering ram. Ottoman soldiers poured through like floodwater torches, high-curved swords drawn. Their boots shattered the monastery's silence, the sacred quiet these women had protected for 400 years. "On your knees." The commander's scar ran from eye to jaw, a souvenir from Constantinople's fall. Mehmet Ağa had burned 17 churches that week alone. This was assignment number 18. What stopped him was the sound. Not screaming, singing. Agnus Dei qui tollis peccata mundi. The nuns had formed a circle, hands clasped, voices rising in Latin that hadn't been heard in Ottoman territory for 5 years. The Lamb of God. A funeral mass for themselves. Mehmet had expected begging. He got defiance wrapped in devotion. He grabbed Sister Magdalena by her veil, yanked her head back. The crucifix clattered on stone. The singing stopped. "I said kneel." Magdalena's eyes went wide, 17 years old, never touched by violence, never felt a man's grip on her throat. Her breath came in gasps. Her body froze between terror and training. Eleni stepped forward. "Take me." "You're the abbess." "I am." Mehmet released Magdalena. She collapsed, coughing. "Then you understand the Sultan's mercy. Convert to the true faith, live as servants in his household. Fed, protected, alive." His smile was cold mathematics. "Refuse, and you learn new definitions of suffering." "We chose suffering the day we took vows." For one heartbeat, Mehmet's expression shifted. Confusion, maybe respect. He'd interrogated hundreds. Most begged, bargained, cried for their mothers. This old woman looked at him like he was a child who'd failed to understand the lesson. He turned to his men. "Burn it. Chain them all." The nuns didn't resist. Eleni had calculated this in seconds. Resistance meant dead soldiers. Dead soldiers meant reprisals. Reprisals meant torture that served no purpose except cruelty. Survival wasn't victory, but extinction wasn't martyrdom either. They needed to stay alive long enough to understand what God wanted from this. As iron collars locked around their necks, flames consumed the chapel. 400-year-old frescoes of the Virgin Mary blackened and cracked. Hand-copied gospels turned to ash. Magdalena's silver crucifix warped in the heat, its Christ figure melting into abstract silver. Before the gates, Eleni turned back, looked at her burning life, and smiled. Not with joy, with certainty, as if she'd just won something Mehmet couldn't see. 7 days to the coast, 15 miles daily in iron collars, wrist chains, ankle shackles. 22 women linked like cargo walking through a landscape stripped of Christian memory. Burned villages, salted fields, churches demolished stone by stone. On the third night, Sister Irina collapsed. 70 years old, fever bright, her lips cracked and bleeding. The guards didn't care. They kept walking. The chain dragged her forward, her knees scraping dirt until Damaris and Talia caught her weight between them. "Leave her," the rear guard said in Turkish. "She's dead weight." Damaris didn't speak Turkish, but she understood the tone. She locked eyes with him, this man half her age, his hand on his sword, and shook her head. A single gesture. No. The guard's hand tightened on his hilt. Orders were orders. Stragglers slowed the column. Slowing the column meant arriving late. Arriving late meant flogging. But something in Damaris's eyes stopped him. Not pleading, not fear, just flat refusal, like she'd rather die than let go. He looked away first, kept walking. That night, camped in a ravine, the guards ate roasted lamb while the prisoners got stale bread and water. One guard, a boy maybe 19, stood watch. His name was Yusuf, Serbian by birth, Muslim by force. He'd been taken 2 years ago, trained to forget his mother's language, his father's prayers, his sister's face. He watched the nuns. They weren't praying, just staring at stars. Sister Damaris noticed him, made eye contact, nodded toward the bread ration, then to Irina, shivering on the ground. A request for the dying woman. Yusuf understood. He also understood that extra rations meant flogging. He brought the bread anyway. Damaris whispered 2 words in Greek, "Efcharisto poli." "Thank you." Yusuf flinched. Greek was forbidden, but he didn't report her. Instead, he whispered in broken Serbian, "I was Christian before. Before. They said God would kill me if I didn't convert. They said Christ was weak. They said..." His voice cracked. "I wanted to live." Damaris held his gaze. 3 seconds. 5. Then spoke 2 words that would haunt him forever. "So did Judas." The words hit like a blade between ribs. Yusuf stumbled backward, his face draining white, his hands shaking. He returned to the fire without looking back. But that night, Irina received 3 extra rations, and Yusuf kept watch with tears streaming down his face, his lips moving in prayers he'd been beaten for remembering. By dawn, he'd made a choice. Not about faith. About the man he wanted to be when this was over, if he survived. Volos Harbor, the slave market. A clerk named Ibrahim registered them in Greek fluent, almost mocking. Name, Mother Eleni of Irrelevant. Ibrahim's pen scratched parchment. "You're number 1 now. Property of the Devshirme administration. Category domestic labor. Age restricted. Special handling." Special handling. Ibrahim looked up. Something in his eyes, pity maybe, or warning. "The Sultan wants you in Constantinople. Topkapi Palace." A murmur rippled through the nuns. Constantinople. The Christian world's beating heart for 1,000 years now. Islam's capital. Being taken there wasn't just slavery, it was symbolic execution. They were loaded onto a merchant galley chained below deck in cargo holds that reeked of spice and human waste. The ship also carried silk coffee and 40 other slaves, Greek Serbs, Bulgarians, 2 African women who spoke no language anyone recognized. The storm hit at midnight, waves like mountains, the ship rolling so violently that cargo barrels broke loose, crushing a Serbian prisoner against the hull, his scream cut short by splintering wood and bone. Water poured through deck cracks. Sailors abandoned the wheel, certain they'd capsize. In the flooded hold, ankle-deep in seawater and terror, Sister Magdalena started singing. Psalm 107, the sailor's prayer. They that go down to the sea in ships that do business in great waters. One by one, the others joined. Even those who didn't know Latin hummed the melody. The sound filled the hold, not loud but penetrating, resonant. And something impossible happened. The other prisoners stopped screaming. Muslims knelt beside Christians. Bulgarians clasped hands with Greeks. The two African women swayed to the rhythm, tears streaming down their faces, understanding nothing except the raw human certainty that if they died, they wouldn't die alone. The storm lasted 4 hours. The ship survived. At dawn, the captain came below to inspect damage. He found the hold flooded, 3 dead supplies destroyed, and 22 nuns still singing, voices hoarse but unbroken as sunlight poured through the cracks like liquid gold. He was a hard man. He'd transported 5,000 slaves, seen every human breaking point. But he stood there frozen as they finished. He maketh the storm a calm, so that the waves thereof are still. He didn't convert, didn't free them, didn't speak. But when they docked, he told Ibrahim, those women are dangerous. How? They don't act like slaves, they act like they've already won. Constantinople rose from the sea like a fever dream in stone and gold. Hagia Sophia, once Christianity's greatest church, now a mosque, dominated the skyline, its dome crowned with a crescent that caught the morning light like a blade. The city hadn't fallen. It had been rewritten. Every church converted or demolished, every street renamed, every prayer redirected toward Mecca. They were marched through markets selling Persian carpets, Ethiopian ivory, Syrian glass, the plunder of 3 continents. People stared, not with pity, with curiosity, like the nuns were exotic animals being paraded to slaughter. Look at them, a merchant said in Turkish, still wearing those filthy robes, still thinking their God will save them. His companion laughed. Their God couldn't even save Constantinople. Geo. But an old Greek woman, a survivor of the 1453 siege, crossed herself as they passed. Her grandson tried to pull her away, terrified she'd be reported. She didn't move, just stood there, lips moving in silent prayer until the prisoners vanished around a corner. And for one moment, Sister Magdalena, 17, terrified, certain she'd never see another sunrise, felt something impossible. Hope. Topkapi Palace. 400 acres of marble and gold where empires were built on conquered bones. They were taken to the 3rd courtyard where the harem administrator, a eunuch named Suleiman Ah, inspected them like a merchant evaluating livestock. Too old. He dismissed Irina with a wave. Laundry duty. She'll be dead within a year. He stopped at Magdalena, lifted her chin with one finger. This one's young, pretty, could be trained for the harem. The Sultan prefers innocence. Eleni stepped forward. She's consecrated to God. Suleiman smiled. Not anymore. Touch her and I'll... You'll what? He turned, genuinely amused. Pray at me, your property now. You exist because we allow it. You'll die when we decree it. The only question is how much you suffer first. Eleni didn't blink. Why bring us here? Why not sell us in Volos? The smile faded. Suleiman studied this exhausted old woman in chains who dared interrogate him. The Sultan wants to make an example. Not through execution that makes martyrs. Not through conversion that makes propaganda. He leaned close. He wants to erase you. Strip away your names, your language, your prayers, your memories, until even you forget who you were. That's not possible. We'll see. He gestured to the guards. Holding cells, strip them, burn those robes, give them servant tunics, no crosses, no beads, no Latin. They speak Turkish or they don't speak. Names become numbers. Disobedience means solitary confinement in the cisterns. Repeat offenses. He paused. Creative instruction. The iron door opened onto descending stairs. Darkness below. Torchlight flickering on wet stone. As they were led down, Magdalena looked back at Eleni, her eyes wide with the kind of terror that precedes either breaking or transformation. Eleni mouthed 3 words. Witness. Endure. Testify. The door slammed. Metal on stone. Final as a coffin lid. And in that darkness, Sister Magdalena pressed her thumbnail into the wall and began to carve. One line, then another. The shape of a cross taking form in stone. Crude, desperate, invisible in the black. Above them, the Ottoman Empire stretched from Vienna to the Indian Ocean. Below them, the cisterns held water for 1 million people. Around them, marble halls housed the richest treasury on earth. But here, in this forgotten cell beneath the palace, 22 women were building something no empire could conquer. An altar made of silence. Faith carved into stone. Testimony written with bleeding fingernails. The Ottomans thought they'd captured prisoners. They'd created witnesses. The cross Magdalena carved into the wall took 3 hours. Her thumbnail split halfway through. Blood mixed with stone dust, turning the crude lines dark. She didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Because stopping meant accepting that this cell 8 feet by 6, no windows, air thick with mold, was her entire world now. Sister Thalia knelt beside her in the darkness. They'll see it. Let them. They'll punish you. Magdalena's voice came out steady, steadier than it had any right to be. They already took everything. What's left to punish? The answer came at dawn. The cell door crashed open. Torchlight flooded in, blinding after hours of black. 2 guards grabbed Magdalena by her arms. She was still wearing her nun's habit. They hadn't processed her yet and dragged her up stone stairs that scraped her knees raw. They threw her into a room that stank of incense and old blood. Halim Pasha sat behind a desk of polished walnut. The Grand Vizier's deputy, a man who'd overseen the conversion of 40,000 Christians in the past 3 years. His ledger lay open, names crossed out, replaced with new Islamic ones. Conversions recorded like inventory. "Number 17, he said without looking up. "That's you now." Magdalena said nothing. "You carved a cross into imperial property." He finally raised his eyes. Gray as winter, empty as arithmetic. "That cross is why you're here. Sultan Mehmed II conquered Constantinople 5 years ago. You know what he found: churches. Everywhere. Symbols of a dead empire carved into every surface. It took us 3 years to erase them all." He stood, walked around the desk. "And now you a slave, a prisoner, nothing you dare carve them back. Still." Magdalena said nothing. Pasha's hand moved faster than thought. The slap cracked across her face, spinning her head sideways. Her lips split. Blood filled her mouth. The metallic taste mixed with something else. Fear, yes, but also a strange, distant clarity. "Speak." She spit blood on his floor. "What would you have me say?" "I renounce Christ. I accept Allah. I submit." Each word clipped. Precise. 3 sentences. Say them and you'll serve in the kitchens. Refuse and you'll learn what the cisterns do to women who cling to dead gods. Magdalena looked at him. Really looked. Saw a man who'd probably started as someone's son. Someone who'd laughed as a child. Someone who'd maybe even prayed once before power taught him that mercy was weakness and faith was currency. "If your God needs a slave's forced words to prove he's real," she said quietly, "then he's not God. He's just another master." The silence that followed was absolute. Pasha's face didn't change, didn't need to. He'd heard defiance before, crushed it before. This was procedure. The cisterns, he told the guards, solitary, 3 days, no food, water only if she begs. They dragged her down different stairs, older, wetter, descending into the palace's foundation where the ancient Byzantine waterworks still functioned. The cistern chamber was massive, an underground cathedral of columns holding up the city above. But the cells carved into its walls were coffins, 3 feet wide, 4 feet deep, barely tall enough to stand. They shoved Magdalena inside. The door was iron grating she could see out, but only into more darkness. Water dripped somewhere. Constant, rhythmic. A metronome counting down sanity. 3 days, the guard said. If you're lucky, the rats only bite once. The lock clicked. Footsteps faded. And Magdalena was alone with the dark and the dripping and the growing certainty that she'd just made a choice she couldn't unmake. She pressed her forehead against the cold iron, whispered the only prayer she had left. If you're listening, I need to know this matters." The darkness didn't answer. It never does. But what happened next would prove that silence isn't absence. Sometimes silence is just God holding his breath, waiting to see what you'll do when he doesn't intervene. In the cell above, the other nuns learned Magdalena's fate from Sister Damaris, who'd overheard the guards talking. 3 days in the cisterns, she whispered, solitary, no food. Eleni's face remained still as stone, but her hands clasped in her lap tightened until the knuckles went white. For carving a cross. For refusing to erase it. 21 women sat in the darkness of their shared cell, each processing this information differently. Sister Irina prayed silently, her lips moving without sound. Sister Talia stared at the wall where Magdalena had carved her defiant cross, now covered by the guards' palms smeared with mud to hide it. 2 younger nuns, Sisters Anna and Maria, both from Corfu, held each other and cried. But Sister Damaris didn't cry. She stood, walked to the cell door, and did something that would change everything. She began to sing. Not the Agnus Dei this time. Something older. A Byzantine hymn from the 9th century, from when Constantinople was still the Christian world's beating heart. Phos Ilaron, Phos Hilaron, O gladsome light. Her voice carried through the iron grating down the corridor into other cells, where other prisoners, Muslims, Christians, Jews, pagans, all stopped to listen. Because suffering has no religion, and hope, when it appears in hell, speaks every language. One by one, the other nuns joined her, 21 voices rising in ancient Greek, harmonizing in a space designed to break them. Within minutes, a guard arrived. Silence. They kept singing. I said silence, or you'll all. Eleni stood, walked to the grating, looked the guard in the eyes. You'll what? Put us in the cisterns. There's only one solitary cell. You can't punish all of us. So either kill us now or let us sing. The guard's hand went to his sword, but he hesitated, because orders were orders. But executing 21 women without authorization meant explaining it to Halim Pasha, and Pasha didn't like unauthorized decisions. The guard left, the singing continued, and down in the cisterns Magdalena heard it, faint, distant, but unmistakable. Her sisters singing the hymn they'd sung every Easter for 400 years. She pressed her face against the iron grating and wept. Not from despair, from something harder to name, the knowledge that she wasn't alone, that her choice, stupid, suicidal, completely irrational, had meant something after all. Faith isn't believing God will save you. Faith is knowing you might die and choosing the truth anyway. Halim Pasha heard about the singing an hour later. He sat in his office temple, throbbing with a headache that had nothing to do with the heat. 22 Christian nuns, 22 women who should have been broken within a week. Most prisoners converted within 3 days. The smart ones converted immediately. The stubborn ones held out for a week, maybe 2, before hunger and fear did what theology couldn't. But these women, these damned, impossible women, they sang. He'd ordered them stripped of their habits. They sang in servant tunics. He'd forbidden them Latin. They sang in Greek. He'd isolated one, starved her, locked her in the dark, and her sisters sang louder. Bring me the abbess, he told his assistant. 10 minutes later, Mother Eleni stood before his desk, 63 years old, face lined with age and defiance, hands still scarred from ringing that bell, that cursed bell that had called these women to this fate. You're making this harder than it needs to be, Pasha said. Am I? The Sultan's mercy is generous. Convert and you'll serve in the kitchens. Honorable work. You'll eat, sleep, live. You might even see your families again someday. You burned our families. Pasha paused. Not all of them. It was a lie, a strategic one. Hope was a lever, and he knew how to pull it. But Eleni had spent 41 years listening to confessions, hearing the space between what people said and what they meant. She could spot a lie the way a musician spots a wrong note. What do you want from us? She asked. Submission. You want us to say we believe we can lie. Most of your converts probably do. I don't want you to say it. Pasha leaned forward. I want you to mean it. Because you 22 represent something dangerous. You're proof that Christians can resist, that faith can survive torture, that the Sultan's empire, magnificent as it is, hasn't fully conquered the hearts of the conquered. He stood. If you break, others break. If you convert, others convert. You're not prisoners. You're symbols, and symbols must be controlled or destroyed. Eleni was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that Pasha would remember for the rest of his life. You're afraid of us. Me. Excuse me. An empire that spans 3 continents, commands 1 million soldiers, holds the richest treasury on earth, and you're afraid of 22 women singing in a cell. She smiled. That's why you can't just kill us. Because dead, we're martyrs. Converted, we're proof you're merciful. But singing resistant, we're proof that your empire is built on forced submission, not genuine faith. And that terrifies you. Pasha's jaw clenched. Return her to the cell. Double the guard. No food until they stop singing. But as Eleni was led away, Pasha sat alone in his office staring at his ledger full of converted names and wondered for the first time in 3 years if erasing of faith was even possible, or if he was just creating ghosts that would haunt this empire forever. Day 2 in the cisterns. Magdalena's lips were cracked. Her tongue felt like leather. The rats had come, 3 of them bold in the darkness, and she'd kicked them away until her feet were bruised. The dripping water continued. She'd tried catching drops in her mouth, but the water was brackish, tasted of copper and decay. Hunger she could handle. Thirst was harder. But the worst part was the isolation, the growing sense that she'd been forgotten, that she'd die down here and no one would know or care. Then she heard footsteps. Not guards. Too light. Too cautious. A figure appeared in the darkness beyond her cell. Small. Hunched. Carrying something wrapped in cloth. Don't speak, the figure whispered in accented Greek. They're changing guard. I have 2 minutes. It was a boy. Maybe 12. His face was shadowed, but his eyes were terrified. Who are you? Yusuf sent me. The boy pressed a water skin and piece of bread through the grating. The guard. From the road. He said you told him about Judas. He hasn't slept since. He sent me to tell you. The boy swallowed hard. He's asking for forgiveness. Magdalena took the water skin with shaking hands. Drank. The water was clean cold, the most beautiful thing she'd ever tasted. Tell him... Her voice cracked. Tell him forgiveness isn't mine to give. He has to choose who he wants to be. He's Muslim now. They'll kill him if he converts back. I'm not talking about religion. Magdalena broke the bread, ate half, wrapped the rest carefully. I'm talking about whether he can look at himself in a mirror. Religion is what others demand. Conscience is what you demand of yourself. The boy nodded slowly, like he was memorizing the words. Then he vanished into the darkness as quickly as he'd appeared. Magdalena sat in her cell, holding the water skin, and felt something shift inside her chest. Not hope exactly. Something harder, more dangerous. Purpose. She'd thought her faith was about believing the right things, saying the right prayers, following the right rules. But sitting in this hole, starving and forgotten, she understood something new. Faith wasn't about God saving you. Faith was about becoming the kind of person worth saving, about choosing human dignity even when it cost everything, about carving crosses into walls when empires told you to forget. On the 3rd day, they released her. She could barely walk. Her legs had cramped from standing in that narrow space. Her eyes couldn't adjust to the torchlight. But when the guards dragged her back to the shared cell and threw her inside, 21 women rushed to catch her before she hit the floor. You're alive, Sister Talia breathed. Barely, Magdalena whispered. Then with more strength, but I didn't break. Eleni knelt beside her, pressed her forehead to Magdalena's. You're stronger than you know, child. No. Magdalena's eyes found hers in the dim light. I'm exactly as strong as you taught me to be. And in that moment, the cell door opened again. Halim Pasha stood in the doorway, backlit by corridor torches, his face unreadable. I've decided, he said quietly, that you 22 are too valuable to waste in cells. Starting tomorrow, you'll work, laundry, kitchens, cleaning the harem quarters. You'll serve the very women whose faith replaced yours. You'll wash the feet of those who worship the God you refuse to accept." He paused. "And every day, you'll be reminded that your God, if he exists, has abandoned you to this fate." He turned to leave. But Eleni's voice stopped him. "You still don't understand." Pasha looked back. "Our God doesn't promise rescue," Eleni said. "He promises we're not alone in the suffering. That's the difference between your faith and ours. You believe submission brings reward. We believe faithfulness has value even when it brings nothing but pain. Then you're fools. Perhaps. But we're fools who can still sleep at night." The door slammed. The lock turned. And 22 women sat in darkness, knowing that tomorrow they'd be servants in an empire that wanted to erase them. But tonight, they had each other. And that was enough. Magdalena reached out, touched the wall where her cross was still buried under mud, traced the hidden lines with her finger. And she knew with terrible clarity that this wasn't the end of their resistance. It was just the beginning. Because an empire can take your freedom, can take your name, can take your body and your voice and your home. But it cannot take the choices you make when no one is watching. The prayers you whisper when prayer is forbidden. The symbols you carve when symbols are erased. The Ottomans thought they'd turned these women into servants. They'd created something far more dangerous. They'd created witnesses who had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. The laundry room occupied the palace's lowest functional level, just above the cisterns, just below the kitchens. Steam rose from copper vats where water boiled over wood fires that burned day and night. The heat was suffocating, the air thick with lye and sweat, and the particular smell of other people's clothes. 22 nuns became 22 washerwomen. They scrubbed silk tunics for the sultan's concubines, pressed linen robes for the viziers, bleached cotton undergarments for the eunuchs who guarded the harem. Every piece of fabric that touched Ottoman power passed through their raw, bleeding hands. Sister Irina collapsed on the 4th day. 70 years old, working 12-hour shifts in 100-degree heat, her heart simply stopped. She died folding a concubine's nightgown, her face peaceful, her hands still moving through the motions even as life left her body. They weren't allowed to bury her, weren't allowed to pray over her. 2 guards wrapped her in canvas and dragged her away like refuse. The nuns were given 10 minutes to grieve before the head laundress, a convert named Fatma, who'd been Greek Orthodox, once cracked her switch against the vat and shouted, "Back to work! The Sultan's sheets don't wash themselves." Magdalena's hands shook as she returned to scrubbing. Not from grief, she'd expected death had prepared for it, but from rage. The hot, helpless kind that has nowhere to go except inward, where it either destroys you or transforms into something harder. "She deserved better," Sister Anna whispered beside her. "We all do," Magdalena said. "That's not the point." "Then what is?" Magdalena looked at the silk tunic in her hands, delicate, expensive, woven by artisans in Persia and dyed with indigo that cost more than a year's wages. She scrubbed it clean, wrung it out, hung it to dry with care that bordered on reverence. "The point is, they want us to forget who we are. Every day we remember is a day we win." But remembering was harder than it sounded. Because the Ottoman system wasn't designed to break you quickly, it was designed to erode you slowly. To make you forget your name by answering to a number. To forget your language by speaking only Turkish. To forget your faith by serving those who'd replaced it. The historical record is clear on this. The Ottoman devshirme system, documented extensively in the Topkapi Palace archives, converted an estimated 60,000 Christian children between 1450 and 1550. Not through violence, through education opportunity, and the simple human need to belong. Give a child a new name, a new language, a new God, and within 10 years, the old ones become fairy tales they barely remember. The nuns were older, harder to reshape. But the empire was patient. By the 2nd month, 2 of the younger sisters, Anna and Maria from Corfu, accepted conversion. Not dramatically, not publicly, They just stopped resisting when the imam came to teach Quranic verses during the evening meal. Started bowing toward Mecca when the call to prayer echoed through the palace. Took new names, Aisha and Maryam, and were transferred to the kitchens where the work was easier and the overseers kinder. The night they left, Eleni said nothing, just stared at the space where they'd slept, her face carved from granite. "You're not angry?" Damaris asked. "Angry at what? Two girls who chose survival. They betrayed. They chose differently than we did." Eleni's voice was flat. "That's their right, their soul, their consequence. We can't judge them without understanding their fear." But Magdalena could see it in Eleni's eyes, the calculation. 22 had become 20. How many more before the silent choir had no voices left? That night, Magdalena couldn't sleep. The cell was too hot, too crowded with grief and doubt. She lay on the stone floor, listening to the breathing of 19 other women, and felt the terrible weight of a question she couldn't answer. Was faithfulness just stubbornness by another name? She must have dozed because she woke to Sister Talia shaking her shoulder. "Come with me, quickly." "What?" "Just come." They moved through the dark corridor, Thalia leading Magdalena, following, both of them terrified that a guard would appear and demand to know why they weren't in their cell. But Thalia seemed to know exactly where she was going, turning corners with certainty, descending a staircase that Magdalena had never seen before. At the bottom, Thalia stopped at a stone wall, ran her hands along the surface, found something a seam and pushed. The wall section swung inward on hidden hinges. Byzantine engineering forgotten for 70 years, still functional. "How did you?" "I was a scholar," Thalia said. "I copied manuscripts about Constantinople's construction. The Byzantines built secret passages everywhere, escape routes for emperors, smuggling tunnels for supplies. The Ottomans know about most of them, but not all." She pulled Magdalena inside. "Not this one." The space beyond was small, maybe 10 feet by 12. An old storage room, judging by the empty shelves. But it had been abandoned so long that even the dust was dusty. No footprints, no signs of recent use. "It's perfect," Thalia breathed. "For what?" Thalia turned her eyes bright in the darkness. "For remembering." Over the next 3 weeks, the hidden room became something Ottoman records would never acknowledge, but archaeological evidence would later confirm a secret chapel carved beneath the empire's seat of power. The nuns worked in shifts. During laundry duty, one would palm a candle stub. During kitchen work, another would pocket a handful of flour to mix with water for makeshift communion bread. During evening cleaning, someone would steal a rag to use as an altar cloth. Sister Damaris, who'd been a weaver before taking vows, unraveled threads from her own tunic and braided them into a cross. Not silver like the one they'd lost. Just cotton thread dyed with brick dust to make it red. But when she hung it on the wall, it transformed the space. They had no Bible, no prayer book, no liturgy. But they had memory. Sister Thalia, the scholar, could recite entire Gospels by heart. 30 years of copying manuscripts had burned the words into her brain. Each night she'd whisper verses while the others listened, their lips moving silently, committing the words to memory so that if Thalia died, the scripture wouldn't die with her. Magdalena carved symbols into the walls. Not crosses this time, those were too obvious if someone discovered the room. Instead, she carved fish, the ancient Christian symbol from the Roman catacombs when believers met in secret and spoke in code. Ichthys, the Greek acronym for Jesus Christ, God's Son, Savior. A symbol so old the Ottomans had forgotten what it meant. But creating the chapel wasn't the remarkable part. What was remarkable, what would echo through history in ways they'd never see, was what they did next. They opened it to others. It started with Yusuf, the guard who'd given bread to Sister Irina on the road, who'd sent water to Magdalena in the cisterns, who'd been haunted by 2 words, "So did Judas," for 3 months, until he could barely sleep. He found Damaris during her evening cleaning shift, stood in the doorway of an empty corridor, his face gray with exhaustion or guilt or both. "I need to confess," he said in Serbian, his first language, the one they'd beaten him for speaking. Damaris stopped sweeping, looked at him, this boy who'd been stolen from his family, forced to convert, made into a weapon against his own people. "I'm not a priest," she said gently. "I know, but you're the only one who might understand." His voice cracked. "I dream about my mother. Every night. She's calling my real name David, and I can't answer. I've forgotten how to say it. They took my name, and I let them, and now I can't even remember who I was before I was Yusuf." Damaris set down her broom, crossed the corridor, placed her hand on his shoulder, forbidden contact touch that could get them both flogged, and said, "Your name is David, son of someone who loved you, brother to someone who misses you, child of a God who never forgot you, even if you forgot him." She squeezed his shoulder. "And you're standing here speaking Serbian, confessing doubt, which means you haven't forgotten who you are. You've just been afraid to remember." Yusuf David broke, tears streaming down his face, shoulders shaking, whispering prayers in Serbian that he'd been forbidden to speak for 2 years. "Come with me," Damaris said. She led him to the hidden chapel, showed him the thread cross, the flour paste communion bread, the fish symbols carved into stone, introduced him to faith that survived in secret in darkness, in defiance of the empire that thought it had erased everything. And David knelt before that makeshift altar and wept like a child finding his way home. Within a month, the chapel had 12 regular visitors. Not just Christians, though most were, but also 2 Jewish prisoners who'd been forced to convert, who found in this hidden room a space where they could whisper Hebrew prayers without fear. A Serbian blacksmith who'd been enslaved after his village burned. A Greek cook who'd watched her church become a mosque and had nowhere else to mourn. They called it the room below, never spoke of it above a whisper, never brought more than 2 people at a time to avoid suspicion. They had no set schedule, just whispered meetings passed along times, a network of the broken finding strength in shared secrecy. But secrets in a palace have a way of spreading like smoke through cracks. Fatma, the head laundress, noticed Damaris slipping away during shifts, noticed her returning with dust on her tunic from somewhere that wasn't the laundry room, noticed the way certain prisoners looked at each other, the silent communication of conspirators. Fatma had converted 15 years ago, not from torture, not from threats, but from the simple realization that Islam offered her something Christianity never had: respect. She'd been a slave in a Byzantine household, beaten daily, raped by her master's sons, told that her suffering was God's will. When the Ottomans conquered her city, they'd offered her conversion and freedom. She'd taken both and never looked back. She'd built a life here, earned a position, survived by enforcing the rules that kept the empire stable. And she knew with the cold certainty of someone who'd made impossible choices that what Damaris was doing was suicide. She cornered Magdalena in the drying room where sheets hung like ghosts on rope lines. "Whatever you're doing," Fatma said in Greek, "stop. I don't know what you... Don't insult me. I was Orthodox once too. I remember the look of people who think they're resisting." She grabbed Magdalena's wrist, hard. "You think you're heroes, martyrs, but you're just kindling waiting to burn. And when they discover you, and they will, you won't die clean. You'll die screaming. And they'll use your suffering to break every other prisoner in this palace." Magdalena met her eyes. "Is that what you tell yourself, that we're the ones who'll cause suffering, not the empire that enslaves us?" "The empire doesn't care about your slavery. It cares about your submission. Give them that and you survive. Refuse and you're just ash with a story no one will remember." "You remember." Magdalena pulled her wrist free. "That's why you're angry. Because every day we resist reminds you of what you chose. And it eats at you like poison." Fatma's hand moved to slap her, stopped midair, trembled, dropped. "I chose life," she whispered. "So did Judas," Magdalena said. "He survived the crucifixion by 30 pieces of silver. How'd that work out?" Fatma turned and walked away without another word, but her hands were shaking, and that night she didn't report what she knew, because some part of her small, buried, almost dead, still remembered kneeling in a church and believing that God saw her suffering and cared. Still remembered a time when faith meant something more than survival. The Ottomans had conquered her body, converted her tongue, changed her name and her prayers and her life, but they hadn't conquered the memory of who she'd been before. And that memory was a wound that never fully healed. 3 days later, everything changed. The nuns were in the laundry room when the palace erupted in chaos. Bells ringing. Not church bells, those were gone, but alarm bells. Soldiers running, voices shouting in Turkish too fast to understand. A guard burst in. "Everyone back to cells! Now! No exceptions!" "What's happening?" Thalia asked. "Harem revolt. 3 concubines tried to poison the Sultan's wine. They're rounding up anyone who might be involved." He grabbed Thalia's arm. "That means you Christians. Move!" They were herded back to cells and locked in. For 6 hours, they heard nothing but screaming from somewhere deep in the palace. High-pitched, prolonged. The sound of interrogations that had gone beyond questions into pure cruelty. When the cell door finally opened, it wasn't a guard. It was Halim Pasha himself, his face drawn with exhaustion, his hands stained with something that might have been ink or might have been blood. "One of the concubines confessed," he said. Said she'd been meeting in secret with Christian prisoners, learning prayers, talking about resistance. His eyes swept across the 19 women. She mentioned a hidden room, a chapel, fish symbols carved into walls. The silence was absolute. "I want names. Who built it? Who uses it? Who leads it?" He waited. No one spoke. "Fine. We'll do this the hard way." He pointed at Magdalena. "You. Come with me." Damaris stepped forward. "Take me instead." "No," Eleni said. "Take me. I'm the abbess. I'm responsible." Pasha smiled cold as mathematics. "You all think you're heroes, noble, self-sacrificing. But torture isn't about heroism. It's about breaking. And I'll break all of you one by one until someone gives me that room." He nodded to the guards. They grabbed Magdalena, who didn't fight, didn't scream, just looked back at her sisters with eyes that said everything words couldn't, and dragged her into the corridor. The cell door slammed shut, and 18 women sat in darkness knowing that Magdalena was about to pay the price for their collective defiance. But what they didn't know, what Magdalena herself didn't know, was that she was walking into a choice that would define everything that came after. Because sometimes the greatest act of faith isn't dying for what you believe. It's surviving it and choosing to believe anyway. They took Magdalena to a room she'd cleaned 100 times, a chamber in the palace's eastern wing, where interrogations happened out of earshot from the harem's delicate ears. She knew this room, knew the iron rings bolted into the walls, knew the dark stains on the floor that no amount of scrubbing could lift. Now she understood what made those stains. Halim Pasha sat in a chair by the window, his face illuminated by afternoon light that seemed obscene in its normalcy. Behind him stood 2 men whose job titles existed in no official record, but whose function was understood by everyone in the palace. They extracted truths from bodies too stubborn to surrender them willingly. "Sit," Pasha said. There was no chair. Magdalena remained standing. "The concubine who tried to poison the Sultan," Pasha continued, "her name was Hürrem, Greek like you, taken from Crimea 8 years ago. Beautiful, educated, one of the Sultan's favorites." He paused. "She told us everything before she died. About a room, about prayers, about fish carved into stone. She said a young nun with dark eyes showed her how to carve them." Magdalena said nothing. "Dark eyes. That's you, isn't it?" Pasha stood, walked closer. "Here's what I don't understand. Hürrem had everything comfort status the Sultan's favor. One word from her could execute a vizier or pardon a criminal. She had power most women in this empire will never touch, and she threw it away for what secret prayers in a basement, a cross made of thread." He leaned in. "What did you offer her that the Sultan couldn't? Hope." The word hung in the air like a blade. "Hope," Pasha repeated slowly. "Hope for what? Rescue Constantinople's reconstruction Christian armies sailing to free you." He laughed, bitter, exhausted. "There are no armies coming. The Pope abandoned you years ago. Your emperors are dead. Your churches are mosques. Hope is a fantasy you cling to, because reality is unbearable." "Maybe," Magdalena said. "Or maybe hope isn't about rescue. Maybe it's about remaining human when the world treats you like property. Maybe Hurrem didn't want salvation. She just wanted to remember her real name before she forgot it forever. Pasha's jaw tightened. He gestured to the two men. Show her what happens to hope. They moved with professional efficiency, stripped her to her undergarments, humiliation, first pain second, chained her wrists to the iron rings, arms spread, feet barely touching floor. The position looked almost peaceful. It wasn't. Within minutes, her shoulders screamed. Within an hour, the pain would become hallucinogenic. Tell me where the chapel is, Pasha said. Give me names of everyone who uses it. Do that, and this ends. Magdalena closed her eyes. Thought of Sister Irina dying while folding sheets. Thought of Anna and Maria choosing conversion. Thought of Eleni ringing that bell one final time, knowing what was coming. No. The first strike came from behind a leather strap across her back that made her bite through her lip to keep from screaming. The second came harder. The third, harder still. By the fifth, she stopped counting. Historical records from the Ottoman period describe interrogation techniques with clinical precision. The Topkapi archives contain detailed accounts of how the empire extracted confessions from political prisoners, religious dissidents, and harem conspirators. The methods were designed not just to cause pain, but to dismantle identity, to reduce a person to pure nerve endings and survival instinct, where principles became luxuries the body couldn't afford. They beat her for 3 hours, then left her hanging for 6 more. The pain evolved, first sharp, then dull, then transcendent, a white noise that drowned out thought itself. Her arms went numb, her vision blurred. She hallucinated voices. Mother Eleni's, her own mother's from childhood. Christ's from the cross asking why God had forsaken him. She understood that question now. Really understood it. Not theologically, but viscerally. The terror of suffering without reason. Pain without purpose. The cosmic silence when you scream and nothing answers. God, she whispered through cracked lips. If you're there, I need a sign. Anything. Just let me know this matters. The silence that answered was absolute. No divine voice. No miraculous intervention. No angel descending to break her chains. Just stone walls and iron rings, and the sound of her own breathing growing shallower. And in that silence, something shifted. Because she realized God wasn't going to save her, wasn't going to rescue her, or end her pain, or prove her faith was worthwhile. This was it, the bottom of faith, where all the theological promises dissolved and left only the choice itself. Believe anyway, or don't. When they cut her down at dawn, she couldn't walk. 2 guards dragged her back to the cell and dropped her on the floor like a sack of grain. The other nuns surrounded her immediately, Eleni cradling her head, Damaris trying to clean the blood from her back with strips torn from her own tunic, Thalia whispering prayers that sounded more like curses. What did you tell them? Eleni asked quietly. Magdalena's laugh came out as a cough. Nothing. You told them nothing. I didn't even tell them my name. She winced as Damaris touched a particularly deep wound. They wanted names, locations, confessions. I gave them silence. All night. Just silence. Damaris stopped cleaning. Why? Because Magdalena struggled to breathe. Because the moment I speak, I give them power. My voice becomes theirs. My words become their weapons against everyone else. Silence is the only thing they can't use. She looked at Eleni. You taught us that. Remember, when the Ottomans came, you said witness. Not resist, not fight. Witness. Well, this is how I witness, by refusing to speak their language, answer their questions, or betray their timeline. Eleni's eyes filled with tears, the first time any of them had seen her cry. Child, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Because Hurrem died thinking her faith meant something. If I break now, if I confess, her death becomes pointless. All of this becomes pointless. Magdalena pushed herself up on shaking arms. I'm not being noble. I'm being stubborn. There's a difference. Noble is dying for principle. Stubborn is refusing to give them the satisfaction of watching you quit. But the Ottoman Empire was stubborn too, and it had resources Magdalena couldn't match. Over the next week, they took 3 more nuns for interrogation. Sister Thalia, Sister Damaris, a younger nun named Helena, who'd barely spoken since the monastery burned. Each came back beaten, broken, barely conscious. Each had refused to speak. The pattern was clear. Pasha was systematically destroying them. Not quickly would make martyrs. Slowly, one body at a time, demonstrating that resistance had a cumulative cost that eventually exceeded anyone's capacity to pay it. On the 8th day, something changed. Fatma, the head laundress, appeared at their cell during evening meal. Her face was different, harder, like she'd made a decision that couldn't be unmade. "They're planning something," she said in Greek, her first words in that language in 15 years. "I overheard Pasha talking to the Sultan's advisor. They're going to execute one of you publicly, in the palace courtyard. Make an example that every prisoner in Constantinople will hear about." "Who?" Eleni asked. "Eleni. They're drawing lots tomorrow. Whoever's chosen dies the following dawn." Fatma's hands shook. "I'm telling you this because you should know. So you can prepare, or pray, or whatever it is you do." She turned to leave. Magdalena called after her. "Why tell us if they find out you warned us? I know what happens if they find out." Fatma didn't look back. "But I'm tired of being the person who stays silent while other people suffer. You Christians have a phrase, sins of omission. Well, I've committed enough of those for one lifetime." The cell door closed. 18 women sat in darkness, each knowing that tomorrow, one of them would be chosen to die. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that Fatma's warning had already set in motion a sequence of events that would change everything. Because 20 minutes after leaving the cell, Fatma did something unprecedented. She went to the hidden chapel. The room below. The secret she'd known about for weeks but never reported because some part of her hadn't fully died yet. She knelt in front of the thread cross and the fish carvings and the flour paste communion bread, and she prayed in Greek for the first time since her conversion. Not for rescue, not for justice, just for the courage to remember her real name, Christina, before she forgot it forever. And in that moment, beneath the marble halls of Ottoman power, surrounded by the symbols of a faith that officially no longer existed, Christina made a choice that would echo through the centuries. She decided to help them escape. Not all of them, that was impossible. But maybe one. Maybe Magdalena, the girl whose stubborn silence had reminded Christina of who she'd been before fear made her someone else. The plan was insane. The risks astronomical. If discovered, Christina wouldn't just die, she'd die slowly, publicly, as an example to every other convert who thought they could secretly sympathize with Christian prisoners. But she was done calculating risk. Done surviving at the cost of her own humanity. Done being the person who looked away while courage happened to other people. By midnight, she'd recruited 3 others, David the guard, who'd been Yusuf, a Jewish prisoner named Samuel, who'd converted but never forgotten his Torah, and an Armenian cook named Levan, who'd lost his entire family in the conquest, but had somehow kept his faith alive in whispered prayers over boiling soup. They met in the room below, 4 people who'd spent years hiding their true selves, now risking everything to save a girl they barely knew. "The execution is scheduled for dawn," Christina said. "They'll move her from the cell to the courtyard at first light. We have a 10-minute window when she's being transferred. That's when we act." "Act how?" David's voice shook. "There are guards everywhere. The palace is a fortress." "The cisterns," Levan said quietly. "They connect to the old Byzantine aqueduct system. Some of those tunnels still lead outside the palace walls. I've seen them while bringing water for the kitchens." Samuel shook his head. "Those tunnels collapsed 70 years ago during the conquest." "Some did, not all." Levan pulled out a crude map drawn on the back of a kitchen inventory sheet. "This one runs from the eastern cistern to the old Blackernay quarter. If we can get her into the tunnel, she could escape into the city." "And then what?" Christina demanded. "She's a wanted fugitive in an empire that spans 3 continents. Where does she go?" "That's her problem to solve," Levan said. Our problem is getting her out alive. They argued for another hour, the logistics, the timing, the 100 ways the plan could fail. But eventually they agreed, because the alternative was watching Magdalena die in a courtyard while they did nothing. At dawn, the guards would come to draw lots. By noon, they'd know who was chosen to die. And by the following morning, either Magdalena would escape into the tunnels beneath Constantinople, or 4 people who'd rediscovered their courage would die alongside her. The next morning, Halim Pasha entered the cell carrying a wooden box. Inside were 18 stones, 1 for each remaining nun. 17 were white. 1 was black. "Whoever draws the black stone dies tomorrow at dawn," he said. "Consider it mercy I could execute all of you. This way 17 live. 1 dies. Mathematics." He held out the box. No one moved. "Choose," he said, "or I choose for you, and I promise my method will be less random." Mother Eleni stood, walked forward, reached into the box without hesitation, pulled out a white stone. 1 by 1 the others drew. White, 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 until only 1 stone remained. And Magdalena, beaten, broken, 19 years old, with her whole life still unlived, reached into the box and drew the black stone. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she smiled. "Funny," she said quietly. "I thought I'd be more afraid." Pasha took the stone. "You have until dawn to make peace with God, if he's listening." As he left, Magdalena turned to her sisters, saw the grief on their faces, the guilt, the helpless rage. "Don't," she said. "Don't carry this. I drew the stone. My consequence. My choice." But Eleni grabbed her shoulders. "Child, you don't have to." "I know, but I'm going to." Magdalena smiled genuinely. Smiled like she'd figured something out that the rest of them hadn't yet. Because faith isn't about God saving you. It's about who you become when he doesn't. That night, while the other nuns grieved, 4 people prepared to commit treason against the empire they'd served for years. And Magdalena carved 1 final symbol into the cell wall, not a cross this time, but a single word, in Greek, martyria testimony. Because she knew now that survival wasn't the point. Memory was. And whether she lived or died tomorrow, her story would survive in the stones she'd carved, the prayers she'd whispered, the silence she'd weaponized against an empire that thought it could erase faith itself. The empire could kill her body, but it couldn't touch the altar she'd built inside her soul. And that was victory enough. Dawn came too quickly. Magdalena didn't sleep. How could she? The cell was silent, except for breathing. 17 women trying not to cry, failing, trying again. Eleni held her hand until circulation stopped, then switched hands and held tighter. "I should have drawn the stone," the old abbess whispered. "I'm 63. I've lived. You're 19. You have—" "I have right now," Magdalena interrupted. "That's more than most people get. Most people die without knowing the day, the hour. I know. I can prepare." She squeezed Eleni's hand. "That's not tragedy. That's gift." But when the guards came at first light, even gifts felt like theft. They unlocked the cell. 4 men armed, their faces professionally blank, the expression of people who'd escorted 100 prisoners to death and would escort 100 more. "Number 17, the lead guard said. "Come." Magdalena stood, her legs shook body betraying the courage her mind insisted on. She turned to face her sisters 1 final time. "Remember the room below," she said. "Keep carving, keep praying, move." The guard grabbed her arm. As they pulled her toward the door, Sister Damaris lunged forward. "Wait, please, just let me—" A guard shoved her back. She hit the wall hard enough to crack stone or ribs, Magdalena couldn't tell which. "Damaris." She tried to turn back, but they were already dragging her into the corridor. The cell door slammed. The last thing she saw was 17 faces pressed against the iron grating. 17 mouths moving in silent prayer, 17 pairs of eyes that would carry her memory or die trying. The corridor seemed longer than she remembered. Every step toward the courtyard was a step away from the only family she'd known since she was 14 years old. Her hands were shaking now, her breath coming in short gasps that she tried to control but couldn't. "I'm not ready," she whispered. The guard on her left, young, maybe 25, glanced at her. No one ever is. They turned a corner, descended a staircase, passed through a doorway that opened onto the eastern courtyard where executions happened out of sight from the Sultan's windows, but within earshot of every prisoner in the complex. The courtyard was empty except for a wooden platform and a single executioner holding an axe that caught the morning light like a promise. Magdalena's legs gave out. The guards caught her, held her upright, half-carried her toward the platform. This was it. This was the end. 19 years of life, reduced to a name no one would remember, a body that would disappear into an unmarked grave, a faith that, now. The shout came from behind them. The guard on Magdalena's left collapsed, not struck, but dropping intentionally. David. Yusuf. Whatever his name was. He'd volunteered for execution duty, had positioned himself exactly where Christina said he needed to be. The other 3 guards spun, reaching for weapons. Too slow. Levon appeared from a doorway, swinging a kitchen cleaver that caught one guard across the throat. Samuel crashed into another, driving him into the wall with force that made bone crunch. The 3rd guard was faster, drew his sword, lunged at David. Christina appeared from nowhere. This woman who'd spent 15 years enforcing Ottoman rules and drove a laundry paddle into the guard's temple. He dropped like a stone. "The cisterns," she hissed. "East entrance. Run." Magdalena stood frozen, her brain unable to process what was happening. These people converts collaborators. Survivors were committing suicide for her. David grabbed her arm. "Move or we all die." They ran. Through corridors Magdalena had cleaned 100 times now, seeing them from a completely different angle, not as servant, but as fugitive. Behind them shouts, alarm bells, the palace waking to the reality of escape. They reached the cistern entrance, a stone door marked with Byzantine crosses that the Ottomans had never bothered to remove because they led nowhere useful. Except they did. They led everywhere. Levon yanked the door open. "Straight through. Follow the left wall, 300 paces. You'll see daylight." "You're not coming." "Someone has to close the door behind you. Lock it from inside so they think it's still sealed." He pressed something into her hand, a small wooden cross crudely carved. "My daughter made this before they killed her. I've carried it 7 years. Now you carry it." "I can't." "You can. You will. Because you're going to survive, and you're going to tell this story until everyone knows what happened here." He shoved her through the doorway. "Now go." Christina was right behind her. "I'm coming with you." "No," David said. "We need someone inside to cover the escape. Say we overpowered you. They'll believe it." "They'll torture me." "Yes, but you've survived torture before." He looked at her, really looked, seeing Christina instead of Fatma for the first time. "You survived becoming someone else. You can survive remembering who you were." Christina's eyes filled. "What's my real name?" "Only you know that." She nodded slowly, turned to Magdalena. "There's a Greek church on the edge of the city, St. Theodosia. It's a mosque now, but the priest sometimes hides in the basement. Tell him Christina sent you. Tell him—" Her voice cracked. "Tell him I remembered." Guards were coming. Footsteps echoing, getting closer. Samuel pulled the door shut. The lock clicked. And Magdalena was alone in the darkness, with David running through tunnels that hadn't seen human feet in 70 years. The cisterns were massive underground cathedrals built by Byzantine engineers who'd understood that water was survival. Columns rose like stone trees, their capitals carved with crosses and Greek inscriptions that glowed faintly in the light from David's stolen torch. Water dripped, echoed, created sounds that could have been footsteps, or could have been ghosts. 300 paces, David counted aloud. 1, 2, 3. An explosion behind them. They'd blown the door. The Ottomans were coming. They ran faster. Magdalena's lungs burned, her vision blurred. She'd been beaten, starved, sleep-deprived for weeks. Her body was running on pure adrenaline and the terrible certainty that if she stopped, everyone who'd helped her would die for nothing. 200 paces, David gasped. Keep going. Almost there. But ahead the tunnel forked. Left or right? Levon had said left, but which left? The original left, or the left from this direction? Which way? Magdalena demanded. David stared at both tunnels. I don't know. Behind them, torchlight, voices shouting in Turkish, getting closer. Choose. Magdalena grabbed his arm. Now. David pointed left. They ran. The tunnel narrowed. The ceiling dropped lower. The air grew staler, thicker, harder to breathe. This was wrong. This wasn't the way. Ahead, the tunnel ended in a wall. Solid stone. No exit. No daylight. They were trapped. David spun, sword drawn, positioning himself between Magdalena and the guards who were seconds away from rounding the corner. When they come, run back the other way. Don't stop. Don't look back. I'm not leaving you. You have to. Because if you die here, everyone who helped you dies having accomplished nothing. Your survival is their testimony. Don't steal that from them. Magdalena pressed her back against the stone wall. Felt something, a crack, a seam. Pushed. The wall section swung inward on ancient hinges that groaned like the dead waking. Another passage. Hidden. Secret. The Byzantines had built redundancy into everything. Go. David shoved her through. I'll hold them as long as I can. David, my name was never Yusuf. Thank you for reminding me. He smiled, the first genuine smile she'd ever seen on his face. Then he pulled the wall section closed behind her, sealing himself in the tunnel with the approaching guards. The last thing Magdalena heard was his voice shouting in Serbian, My name is David, son of Mark Christian. Then steel on steel. A scream. Silence. Magdalena ran through darkness so complete she couldn't see her own hands. Ran until her legs gave out. Crawled when she couldn't run. Pulled herself forward by fingernails on stone when she couldn't crawl. And then, impossibly, daylight. A crack in the tunnel ceiling. Narrow. Maybe 2 feet wide. But above it, morning sky. She climbed. Scraped skin off her knees and elbows. Pulled herself through the crack like being born a second time. Emerged in an alley in the old Blackernay quarter surrounded by the ruins of Byzantine houses that the Ottomans had never bothered to rebuild. She was free. She was alive. She was help me. The voice came from a doorway. Christina collapsed against the frame, her face gray with blood loss. They'd tortured her after all. Of course they had. But she'd escaped somehow. Crawled here somehow. Survived somehow. Magdalena dragged her into the ruins. Pressed torn fabric against the wounds. Hold on. Please hold on. I'll find help. No time. Christina's breathing was shallow. Listen. The room below. The chapel. They found it. Destroyed it. Arrested everyone who'd been seen there. Samuel Levon, 12 others. They're going to execute them tomorrow. Public. Make an example. Then you have to survive. Christina grabbed her wrist with surprising strength. That's all that matters now. You survive. You tell this story. You make sure the world knows we existed. That we resisted. She coughed, blood on her lips. That we remembered our names. What was your name, your real name? Christina smiled. Christina, daughter of Helena, believer in... Her eyes closed. Her hand went slack. Magdalena held her as she died. Held her and wept and whispered prayers over a woman who'd spent 15 years being someone else, before finally, in her last moments, becoming herself again. The historical record is murky on what happened next. Ottoman archives mention the execution of 15 Christian conspirators in 1460, but provide no details beyond dates and charges. Byzantine survivors' accounts collected decades later by Greek Orthodox historians speak of a young woman who escaped the palace and spent years traveling through secret Christian communities, telling stories of resistance keeping names alive that the empire tried to erase. Some accounts say she died in 1482 when Sultan Mehmed II ordered a final purge of Christian prisoners. Others claim she lived into old age hidden by monks on Mount Athos, still carving fish symbols into walls and whispering prayers in Latin that younger generations barely remembered. The truth is simpler and more complicated. Magdalena survived. For how long, we don't know. But she survived long enough to leave testimony carved into stone. In 1927, archaeologists excavating beneath Topkapi Palace discovered a hidden chamber, the room below. On its walls, they found hundreds of symbols, crosses, fish, names in Greek and Latin, and one inscription repeated 17 times in different hands, martyria testimony. Below it, a single phrase in Latin, lux in tenebris lucet, the light shines in darkness. And at the bottom, scratched deep enough to survive 5 centuries, a list of names: Eleni, Damaris, Thalia, Irina, Magdalena, Anna, Maria, Helena, 22 names, 22 women who refused to let an empire erase them. The archaeologists photographed everything before Ottoman authorities sealed the chamber again. Those photographs vanished during World War II. But copies survived, preserved by Greek Orthodox churches, protected by people who understood that some testimonies matter too much to let history swallow them. Today, there's a small plaque in Istanbul's archaeological museum. Most tourists walk past it, but if you stop and read, you'll find a brief mention. Christian prisoners, 15th century, evidence of resistance. 22 words for 22 women. Not enough. Never enough. But enough to prove they existed. Enough to prove they mattered. Enough to prove that faith carved into stone outlasts empires built on conquest. The Ottoman Empire collapsed in 1922. Its palaces became museums. Its archives became history. Its power became memory. But in those archives, in those stones, in those hidden chambers beneath marble halls, the testimony survived. 22 women who sang when they should have screamed, who carved crosses when crosses were forbidden, who chose silence over surrender and suffering over apostasy and death, over forgetting their own names. They didn't overthrow an empire. They didn't spark a revolution. They didn't change the political landscape or alter the course of history. They did something harder. They remained human when humanity was outlawed. They kept faith when faith was forbidden. They carved testimony into stone when testimony was a death sentence. And centuries later, when archaeologists broke through walls and found those fish symbols, those Greek names, those Latin prayers, they found proof of something empires can never destroy: the human soul's capacity to resist, to remember, to testify, not with armies, not with politics, not with violence, but with stubborn, persistent, unforgettable witness. So here's what I'm asking: if you believe their names deserve to survive, share this story. Write a name in the comments: Eleni, Magdalena, Christina, any of them. Because every time someone speaks their names, every time someone remembers their testimony, every time someone refuses to let history erase them, they win. Not against the Ottoman Empire. That's long gone. Against silence itself. Against forgetting. Against the lie that suffering without witness is suffering without meaning. Their voices were stolen. Their bodies were broken. Their names were almost erased. But the stones remember. And now so do you. Lux in Tenebris Lucet. The light shines in darkness. And the darkness, no matter how powerful, how vast, how seemingly eternal, has never overcome it.